He was once the seventh richest man on earth, a man who made more money selling death than most nations earn in a year. He built a cocaine empire, ruled a country through fear, and died on a rooftop with a gun in his hand. This is the true story of Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born in Rio Negro, Colombia, on December 1st, 1949. Raised in a poor household, Pablo didn't grow up with dreams of becoming a gangster. He wanted to be rich, by any means necessary. As a teen, he hustled on the streets of Medellin, grave robbing, car theft, selling fake diplomas and lottery tickets. His earliest business was stealing tombstones and reselling them to crooked funeral homes. But small crime wasn't enough. Escobar was sharp, ambitious, and when cocaine emerged as the new gold in the early 1970s, he saw his chance. Pablo didn't just join the cocaine trade, he revolutionized it. He founded the Medellín Cartel, a drug empire that would go on to dominate 80% of the world's cocaine supply. He smuggled cocaine into the US using everything from private jets to dead bodies. Entire fleets of planes flew between Colombia and Miami, sometimes making $10 million a trip. By the time the US government realized what was happening, it was too late. Escobar's cartel was unstoppable. At the height of his power in the mid-1980s, Escobar made an estimated $420 million a week. His fortune was so massive, his cartel spent $2,500 a month on rubber bands alone to wrap cash. He stored money in warehouses and fields, losing millions to rats and mold, and never cared. Escobar built his own paradise, Hacienda Nápoles, complete with a private zoo, racetrack, and a dinosaur-shaped entrance gate. But wealth wasn't enough. He wanted control. Escobar bribed judges, paid off cops, and even ran for Congress in 1982. He pushed the mantra, plata o plomo, for silver or lead. Take the bribe or take a bullet. To the poor, he was a Robin Hood. He built homes, schools, and churches. To the government, he was a terrorist in a suit. When Colombia tried to extradite him to the US, Escobar declared war. Bombings, massacres, kidnappings. Judges and politicians were assassinated in broad daylight. In 1989, he ordered the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing 107 people, just to eliminate a single target. He eventually surrendered in 1991, but under his terms. He built his own luxury prison, La Catedral. Inside, he had a nightclub, a waterfall, and a jacuzzi. He played football, drank whiskey, and conducted cartel business like royalty. When authorities tried to move him to a real prison, Escobar escaped. The manhunt began. For over a year, Escobar was the most wanted man on earth. The Colombian government, US DEA, and a mysterious group called Los Pepes, made up of rivals and ex-police, hunted him across Colombia. On December 2nd, 1993, they found him hiding in a middle-class Medellin neighborhood. Escobar fled to the roof. Bullets flew. One struck him in the ear. Some say it was a police sniper. Others believe Pablo pulled the trigger himself, refusing to be taken alive. At 44 years old, the king of cocaine was dead. But his empire, it didn't die with him. The Medellin cartel splintered. Rival Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria didn't just run a drug empire. He built a kingdom, a violent, sophisticated billion-dollar shadow economy. And at the center of it all was one man with an iron will, a dark vision, and an uncanny ability to turn white powder into unimaginable power. But how did it all begin? In the late 1970s, the streets of Medellin were flooded with poverty, political instability, and lawlessness. Colombia was still recovering from decades of civil unrest. And Escobar, a street-savvy hustler with a knack for bribery, saw opportunity in the chaos. He had dabbled in crime already, smuggling electronics, running fake lottery tickets, and even stealing tombstones to resell them. But none of those things had the potential he found in cocaine. Cocaine wasn't just a drug. In the United States, it was quickly becoming a status symbol. Glamorized by Hollywood, idolized in music, snorted in the penthouses of Manhattan. And Escobar? He saw the storm coming before the thunder hit. With ruthless ambition, Escobar began to organize a network. He partnered with local chemists, bribed rural farmers to grow coca plants, and built laboratories hidden deep in the Colombian jungle. These labs weren't shacks. They were industrial-scale production sites, protected by armed guards, camouflaged by rainforest, and impossible to trace. Once the product was ready, the challenge became moving it. Escobar's brilliance lay in logistics. He engineered one of the most complex smuggling operations the world had ever seen. Cocaine was flown in small planes, often using remote airstrips in the Caribbean. He used submarines, shipping containers, even cattle exports to hide the drugs. And if that didn't work, he bought off customs officers and airport officials, turning entire ports into silent partners. The United States quickly became his primary market. At one point, it's estimated that 80% of all cocaine in the U.S. was supplied by Escobar's Medellín Cartel. That wasn't just domination, it was monopoly. By 1982, Escobar was earning over $420 million a week. Let that sink in. $60 million a day. Enough to pay off governments. Enough to burn $2.1 billion in cash every year, just from rats eating stored bills in moldy warehouses. And still stay wildly profitable. Money was no longer his goal. Power was. Escobar wasn't alone. He built a cartel, but he made sure he was the one in control. He recruited men with nothing to lose, former military, ex-cons, street kids, and gave them purpose. If they were loyal, he rewarded them. If they crossed him, they disappeared. Inside the cartel, Escobar created a brutal system based on a simple principle. Plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe, or take a bullet. And people listened. To ensure loyalty, he divided operations into units. One group handled transportation, pilots, drivers, boat captains. Another handled production, lab workers and chemists. Yet another enforced security, assassins, hit squads, intelligence networks. He even had a division for laundering money through banks, shell companies, and casinos. Every link in the chain had a role. Every mistake was punished with death. The cartel's influence wasn't limited to Colombia. Escobar built relationships with Mexican drug traffickers, U.S. distributors, and political contacts across Central America. He even created fake charities to wash his image, building homes, clinics, and soccer fields in Medellin. To the poor, he was a Robin Hood. To the government, he was a ghost. To the DEA, he was public enemy number one. But Escobar wasn't running from the law. He believed he could buy the law. And for a time, he did. He bribed police commanders to look away. He paid off judges to drop charges. He funded election campaigns for mayors and congressmen, turning public officials into cartel puppets. And when money failed, he used fear. Colombian judges began resigning. Politicians received death threats. Entire villages were silenced after daring to speak up. Journalists disappeared. Activists were bombed. By the late 1980s, the Medellín Cartel had murdered over 4,000 people, including journalists, police officers, politicians, and civilians caught in the crossfire. Despite the violence, Escobar maintained a strange moral code, at least publicly. He banned his men from selling cocaine in Colombia. He offered scholarships to orphans. He even had his own zoo, filled with exotic animals, and would take children on tours. To the outside world, it was a contradiction. A killer with a conscience, a billionaire with blood on his hands, and a Bible in his car. But beneath that facade was a man who believed one thing above all. If you control the product, the roots, and the people, you become untouchable. Escobar's smuggling operation was so successful that the DEA once described it as a parallel government. He had his own soldiers, his own intelligence agents, his own transport networks, and in many parts of Colombia, his authority outweighed the government's. The U.S., finally recognizing the threat, launched Operation Kingpin, a multi-agency mission to capture or kill Escobar. Colombian forces, pressured by the Reagan administration, began intercepting shipments and raiding jungle labs. But Escobar adapted. He built runways in the jungle, moved operations underground, shifted smuggling from air to sea. He even ordered the assassination of the justice minister who dared to expose him. The Medellín Cartel became not just a criminal empire, but a symbol of how corruption, poverty, and power could warp a nation. And at the heart of it all was a man who never flinched, never apologized, and never stopped growing his empire. Pablo Escobar wasn't just a drug dealer. He was the CEO of crime, a mastermind, a manipulator, a myth in the making. But for all his wealth and terror, even Escobar couldn't control everything. And in the shadows, his enemies, both political and personal, were beginning to close in. Because every empire, no matter how powerful, eventually begins to crack. And Escobar's was about to face its first tremors. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar was no longer just a drug dealer. He was a king in his own right. His Medellin cartel was smuggling 15 tons of cocaine per day into the United States, with profits soaring to as much as $420 million a week. But what made Escobar more dangerous than any other drug lord was not just his wealth or his brutality, it was his ambition. Escobar didn't want to stay in the shadows. He wanted recognition. He wanted legitimacy. And to him, the path to legitimacy ran straight through Colombian politics. Escobar's political ambitions were not just wishful thinking. He made calculated moves to buy influence and shape public perception. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, he began funding housing projects, building soccer fields, and paving roads in poor neighborhoods in Medellin. To many of the people there, he wasn't a criminal, he was a hero. In fact, they had a name for him, El Patron, the boss. Escobar capitalized on that popularity. In 1982, he successfully ran for a seat as an alternate member of the Colombian Congress. The man who once sold stolen tombstones and smuggled contraband was now walking the halls of political power. His seat in Congress granted him diplomatic immunity, making it harder for the government to investigate his cartel. It was a masterstroke, a blend of criminal genius and public manipulation. But not everyone was fooled. He publicly denounced Escobar's congressional role, calling him a narco-politician and demanding he be expelled. It triggered a political firestorm. Escobar responded the only way he knew how, with blood. In 1984, Lara Bonilla was assassinated by motorcycle gunmen. Everyone knew who was behind it. The murder shocked Colombia and triggered a shift in the government's approach to Escobar. The Colombian government could no longer pretend Escobar was a misunderstood philanthropist. He was a ruthless criminal with blood on his hands and power in his grip. The pressure mounted. His congressional immunity was stripped. He was officially linked to the drug trade. Escobar had been unmasked, but it was too late. Even with politics turning against him, his grip on Medellin and its people remained strong. He launched what became known as the narco-insurgency. Escobar offered cash rewards to anyone who killed police officers. In response, hundreds of officers died. He declared war on the government, demanding that extradition of Colombian nationals to the U.S. be outlawed. His motto? Better a grave in Colombia than a cell in the U.S. Despite the chaos, Escobar continued to fund social programs in poor neighborhoods, making him a paradoxical figure, a mass murderer with a messiah complex. By the end of the 1980s, his political dream was dead, but his influence was stronger than ever. The government had declared him a national threat. The United States labeled him the most dangerous man on earth, and Escobar didn't care, because for him, politics was never the end goal. It was just a tool. The real war was just beginning. Pablo Escobar was no longer just a businessman or politician. He was a king at war, one whose empire ran not on laws but on fear. His days of handshakes and smiling charity photo ops were now over. He had tasted the halls of Congress and then had it all ripped away. So he made a choice, not to fight the system, but to burn it down. By the late 1980s, Escobar had become public enemy number one, not only in Colombia, but across the Western world. He was no longer hiding. He didn't need to. Why hide when the cops, the courts, and even the presidents were in your back pocket? Escobar transformed Medellin into a battlefield. He ordered assassinations of judges, politicians, journalists, even priests, anyone who spoke against him. No one was safe. And the method? It was always brutal. A car bomb, a motorcycle drive-by, a bullet to the head in broad daylight. His cartel even trained children to act as informants and hitmen. If they died, Escobar would pay for the funeral and pay their families handsomely. The message was clear: loyalty was rewarded, disobedience punished, publicly and permanently. One of the most infamous symbols of this era was Escobar's plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet. Most people took the bribe. Who wouldn't? Escobar didn't just want to rule the underworld, he wanted to control the very reality people lived in. Meanwhile, the Colombian government was crumbling under pressure. Police stations were bombed, prisons were overrun, even planes were not safe. November 27, 1989. A domestic Avianca flight takes off from Bogota. Inside, 107 people. One of them, Escobar believed, was an informant. A bomb exploded mid-air. Everyone on board died, but the informant wasn't even on the flight. The message? Escobar didn't care about innocence, only obedience. The following month, tragedy struck again. Luis Carlos Galan, a presidential candidate openly opposed to Escobar, was gaining momentum. He promised to crack down on cartels and approve extraditions to the U.S. He was Colombia's best hope. Escobar saw him as a threat. At a rally in Soacha, Galan was shot dead on stage, right in front of thousands. People cried. Then they went home, because crying too loudly could get you killed. Escobar declared all-out war. He built an army, more than 500 men, armed with rocket launchers, grenades, and M16s. Many of them were ex-police or ex-military. They knew how to fight and whom to kill. If a judge signed an arrest warrant against Escobar, they'd be dead within 48 hours. If a journalist printed his name, they were gone, no questions asked. And if a government building stood in the way, he bombed it. In 1989, the DAS headquarters, Colombia's FBI, was hit by a truck bomb. Over 50 people were killed. Hundreds were injured. It was one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in Colombian history. Yet, even as the body count rose, Escobar remained a folk hero to many. In the slums of Medellin, he was still seen as El Patron, the man who built houses, gave scholarships, and threw Christmas parties. Children sang his name. Parents called him a saint. The same man bombing their capital was also paying their rent. The duality was maddening. How could someone be both a monster and a messiah? But then came the thing Escobar feared most: extradition. To him, there was no greater threat than being sent to an American prison. In Colombia, he could pay his way out of anything. In the U.S., he would rot. So he escalated the violence even more. Judges who signed extradition papers were found dead. Their families? Gone. Entire court systems had to be moved to secret locations. By the early 1990s, over 4,000 people had died in Escobar-related violence. Colombia was bleeding, and the world was watching. That's when the government made a desperate move. They offered Escobar a deal. If he turned himself in, he wouldn't be extradited. In fact, he could build his own prison. Yes, his own prison. He agreed. And so, in 1991, Escobar surrendered to Colombian authorities. He was escorted, like a celebrity, into a luxurious compound he called La Catedral. It had a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, a disco. Some say it even had an aquarium with exotic fish. This wasn't prison. This was paradise, surrounded by guards he handpicked. La Catedral became his new base of operations. He continued to run the cartel from inside, ordering hits, managing shipments, collecting payments. When two of his associates betrayed him, he had them brought to the prison, tortured, killed, buried right there on the grounds. The Colombian government pretended not to notice, because the violence had stopped, for now. But peace bought with blood doesn't last. By 1992, the truth about La Catedral leaked to the press. The government was humiliated. They planned to transfer Escobar to a real prison. He heard the whispers. He knew what was coming. So, he escaped, vanished into thin air, and the war reignited. For the next 16 months, Escobar was Colombia's ghost. No one could find him. No one could stop him. But this time, he was alone. His political power was gone. His allies were dead or hiding. The people were turning against him. Even his cartel had splintered. A rival group called Los Pepes, made up of his enemies and former friends, joined forces with Colombian and U.S. agents to hunt him down. They were tired of running, and Escobar was tired of hiding. The clock was ticking, and Pablo Escobar knew the end was near. The year is 1993. The king is cornered, the empire is collapsing, and Pablo Escobar, the most powerful drug lord the world had ever known, is running out of time. His wealth can no longer protect him. His allies, dead. His enemies, closing in. For the first time in years, Pablo Escobar is alone. The fall of Escobar began the moment he walked out of La Catedral. His luxurious prison had become a national embarrassment, and his escape pushed the Colombian government to finally act, with help from the United States. Together they formed the Search Bloc, a special police unit trained and funded by U.S. intelligence. Their single mission, hunt down Escobar. But they weren't the only ones looking. The Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, had declared a personal war. They were a rogue group made up of former cartel rivals, victims' families, and even ex-cops. And they weren't held back by laws or human rights. They used Escobar's tactics against him: kidnappings, torture, mass executions. They even murdered his accountants and bombed the homes of his lawyers. No one close to Escobar was safe, not even his family. Escobar had to keep moving. He changed hideouts constantly, sleeping in abandoned apartments, slums, even jungle shacks, always with a radio, always with a gun. He called his family almost every day. His voice, once calm and in control, had become anxious. He worried about his wife and children. He feared betrayal at every corner. And worst of all, he knew he was being listened to. U.S. forces had tapped his phone frequencies. They triangulated his location with every call. And each time he said, "I love you, mi amor," he brought the noose tighter around his neck. In Medellin, Escobar's image was changing. The same people who once called him a saint now lived in terror. The man who gave them homes had turned their streets into war zones. His former bodyguards became informants. His own lieutenants, men who had killed for him, now hunted him for cash rewards. Even his family had to flee the country. They were denied entry into the U.S., Germany, and several other nations. They ended up in hiding, vagabonds with no country. Pablo's greatest fear had become reality. Not death, but irrelevance. December 2nd, 1993. Pablo Escobar turns 44. He spends it in a small, damp house in the Medellin neighborhood of Los Olivos. Just a mattress, a radio, and a revolver. He makes a call to his son, Juan Pablo, to tell him he's proud. He says he's not afraid to die, but there's something in his voice, something hollow. He knows this is goodbye. That call lasts 16 minutes, just enough time. The search block has locked on. They surround the house. DEA agents watch from nearby rooftops. Los Pepes are ready to finish the job if the cops fail. It's not just a raid, it's an execution. Escobar fires his weapon. He tries to flee across the rooftop. He returns fire, bullets tearing through concrete. But he's outgunned, outmanned, out of time. One bullet hits him in the torso, another in the leg. The fatal shot enters behind his right ear. The man who once ruled an empire with terror now bleeds out on a red-tiled roof, face down, surrounded, alone. The news spreads like wildfire. Pablo Escobar is dead. Some cheer, others cry. Many are stunned. In the Medellin slums, thousands gather. They march through the streets carrying his photo. To them, El Patron was still a hero. His funeral draws over 25,000 mourners, men, women, children. Some throw roses on his casket. Others kiss his image as if mourning a saint. And just like that, the story ends. Or does it? Because Pablo Escobar may have died, but the ghost of his empire lives on. The Medellin Cartel shattered into smaller factions, but cocaine exports never stopped. If anything, they became harder to trace, more ruthless, more scattered. New kings rose, new cartels, same bloodshed. Escobar had set a blueprint: power through fear, money without borders, violence without limit. In the end, he wasn't just a man, he was a system. one that never truly died. From a poor boy selling stolen tires on Medellin streets to the most feared drug lord in modern history, Escobar's life was a twisted legend, filled with luxury and cruelty, charity and murder, family and betrayal. He built an empire with blood and paid for it with his soul. Power has a price, and in Colombia, that price was paid in blood, bullets, and billions. When people talk about Pablo Escobar, they focus on the violence, the fear, the drugs. But beneath all that chaos was something more complex, an economy built on cocaine. From the slums of Medellin to international banks in Panama and Switzerland, Escobar's empire wasn't just criminal, it was financial. Pause. Ones. At his peak in the late 1980s, Escobar's Medellin Cartel was moving 80 tons of cocaine per month into the United States. That's 15 Boeing 747s full of white powder, each shipment worth hundreds of millions. And that money had to go somewhere. So Escobar reinvested it, not just in guns and bribes, but in entire neighborhoods. He funded hospitals, soccer fields, schools, and housing. To the poor in Medellin, he was Robin Hood with a gold-plated AK. To the government, he was a nightmare wrapped in pesos. Next. In Barrio Pablo Escobar, a hillside slum he built for the homeless, hundreds of families lived rent-free. He gave them homes with running water and electricity. He handed out cash in public like a celebrity tossing candy. He paid students tuition. He bought ambulances for clinics. To the average citizen, Escobar did more than the government. He made people feel seen, valued, safe. But every brick, every bag of rice, every free school book came at a cost. Next, because as Escobar gave with one hand, he took with the other. His war against the Colombian state wrecked the economy. By the early 1990s, Colombia's GDP growth had slowed drastically. Foreign investment collapsed. Tourism? Almost non-existent. Who wanted to visit a country where car bombs went off during rush hour? Where judges were murdered in daylight? Where corruption was so deep that drug lords had more power than presidents? The cost wasn't just financial, it was existential. Entire sectors became corrupted. Bankers laundered money through complex shell companies. Politicians took campaign donations from cartels. Construction firms were used to clean illicit funds through fake projects. The economy twisted inward. The line between legitimate and illegitimate blurred, until in some towns there was no line at all. Escobar's billions also distorted the global economy. He smuggled money into Panama banks. He purchased private jets, exotic animals, and real estate across the Caribbean and South America. He bought soccer teams to clean dirty cash. In fact, so much U.S. currency was smuggled into Colombia that the peso-dollar exchange rate became unstable. He inflated entire industries, then crashed them when those industries fell under suspicion. Escobar could crash a market just by touching it. But what happened when he died? What happens when the man holding up both the economy and the chaos is gone? In the hours after Escobar's death on December 2, 1993, the world expected Medellin to erupt in violence. But it didn't. Instead, it exhaled. But the economic scars were everywhere. The Medellin Cartel fragmented, but cocaine exports didn't stop. They evolved, became smarter, more invisible, and the money laundering networks Escobar built, they remained. Colombia's GDP took time to recover. In the years following Escobar's death, the country shifted from narco-capitalism to diversified recovery. Global investors slowly returned. Tourism began to tick up. The government, now under less direct threat, began serious reforms. But trust? That took longer. Escobar left behind a strange legacy. To some, he was a terrorist who burned the soul of Colombia. To others, he was a folk hero, proof that one man could challenge a corrupt system and give back to the poor. But even the poorest barrios that praised him now live with the generational consequences of his empire. They see it in the lack of international confidence, in the lingering fear, in the whispered stories passed down to children. Today, Colombia is a nation trying to heal. Its economy is stronger, its streets are safer, but the ghost of Escobar still looms over the skyline. Because you can destroy a man, you can shoot him, bury him, erase his name from buildings, But you can't so easily destroy what he built. A shadow economy, a culture of corruption, a blurred line between power and terror. And so the question remains, was Escobar a monster created by Colombia, or a monster Colombia was forced to live with? Rival cartels rose. Colombia would never be the same. Today, Escobar is remembered not just as a drug lord, but as a symbol of how power, greed, and violence can consume a nation. And in the end, not even billions of dollars could save him. Like this video if you want more insane true crime stories, and hit subscribe for the next unbelievable case, because trust us, it only gets darker from here.